It's a sailboat with no shrouds. It's named after someone's mistress, and it's Canadian. This week on Everything You Need to Know, we're talking about Nonsuch. Let's start with the name, Nonsuch. Where the heck did they come up with that? And why does it sound like I just made it up? It makes me think of nonsense or no such thing, like a mast with no stays. No such thing, right? The name of the company isn't something just made up. It's actually named after a boat, but not just any boat. The first trading vessel of the Hudson's Bay Company. That's a company up here in Canada for you guys that have never heard of it. But that ship Nonsuch that the Hudson's Bay Company was using was actually named after someone's mistress, but not just any mistress. The mistress of King Charles II in a place called England. Now, I'm not exactly up to snuff enough to educate you guys on British history, so I have no idea who he is, and I have no idea who she is. But I do know there's also a palace called Nonsuch. Anyway, if you're anything like me, the first time you saw a Nonsuch sailboat go by, you were probably like, what the heck is that? The first thing you notice is the really weird boom. It's a wishbone that sort of goes around both sides of the boat. So the Nonsuch story starts in the 70s with a man called Gordon Fisher. He wanted a cruising boat that was roomy inside, but really, really easy to single-handed sail. I guess he didn't have any friends. He wanted it to be about 30 feet long with the roominess of like a 35-footer. So he commissioned a designer named Mark Ellis to create it. Mark Ellis designed what is called, and I'm gonna say this wrong, a Lungstrom rig. Sounds German, I don't know. But instead of the normal Lungstrom rig, he changed the boom. Instead of just a post, he made the wishbone. And we're gonna talk about why he did that a little bit later. But this guy, Mark Ellis, and his design, he was out there. Conventional, not for a second. Sails? No. One sail. We're gonna have one. Stays and shrouds to hold the mast up and cables and things? No, who needs them? We'll make it 30 feet long and 12 feet wide. Seriously, it's 12 feet wide. So they tried to get Hinterholer to build the thing. Hinterholer, a famous, renowned boat builder, and these guys show up with drawings of a Lungstrom rigged floating cottage. That really does take some balls. So Hinterholer had some reservations, obviously. He was hemming and hawing for a while, but eventually he did agree to build the boat. And production started in St. Catharines, which is in Ontario, which is in Canada. The first Nonsuch 30 rolled out in the summer of 1978. If you've seen a Nonsuch, there's a good chance it was a 30. But they built some other boats too. They built some sort of entry-level boats like a 22, and they built some this is my second boat sort of boats like a 26, and they built some this is my third boat like the 33, the 32, and a 36. And then they built the I'm headed to the Caribbean 45-footer, which, I mean, that's pretty cool. The original boats all sported this crazy rig with the wishbone and no stays. And the rig is more commonly referred to as a cat-rigged sailboat. Lady K Sailing is brought to you by patrons, people who give a couple of bucks an episode to keep this channel improving. And now that this channel is my full-time job, that's very important to me. I'd like to give a huge shout out and a big thank you to the latest patron, member of the team, Roderick. Thank you so much for joining us. In the later years, Nonsuch switched from their typical fin keel to a shoal draft keel. And they started using masts made out of something called carbon fiber, which is apparently very light and very strong. They made almost 1,000 boats, and a lot of them were sailing around the Great Lakes, and that's kind of where you're going to find them. But you can also find them up and down the east coast of the US, and even a few of them in Europe. You know what that means? They've crossed oceans with one sail. There are a couple famous Nonsuch yachts that really speak volumes to the brand. It's Serenity, the fourth Serenity, and Saki, the fourth one of those two. Those were the names of the boats. Both boats were abandoned for, storms, whatever the heck's going on. They had to abandon ship. Both boats were found floating at sea, sort of washed up where people found them. Still floating, still fine, still completely, like, the people abandoned these boats because they thought everything was gone to hell and everybody's going to die. And the boats were found months later, still floating. Both of those boats, by the way, got a little bit of a refit, and they're both still sailing today. That's huge for a brand to be able to say that, the humans gave up, abandoned ship, and we found the boats later, and, we did some new sails and stuff and tuned the engine up, and yeah, they're still sailing. So, well made? Yeah. Now, of course, Nonsuch stopped making boats eventually. In the mid-90s, sort of when a lot of these companies went under that weren't stamping out production boats, 300 a day or whatever. But a company called Wiggers Custom Yachts paid for the rights to make more of them. And you therefore can still buy a brand new Nonsuch if you'd like to. And they're still made in Ontario, which is still in a place called Canada. Talking about Nonsuch, we have to talk about what makes them so special, and that's, of course, the rig. Why do they do it differently than every other sailboat company at that time? What exactly is a cat rig? Typically, a cat rig means the mast is up at the front of the boat instead of near the middle, like a sloop-owning sailors are sort of used to. They also typically are unstayed, meaning there's no standing rigging to hold them up. There's no metal cables, nothing to get in the way. Easy to set up, and no expensive rigging that you have to replace all the time. From the mast, they will typically have one sail, what we would kind of refer to as a mainsail, I guess. Think about the Laser, the most successful little racing boat that there is. It's cat rigged. The mast is at the front, big sail behind it. And yes, I know later lasers had spinnakers and stuff, but typically it is a cat rigged boat. It's simple. It's extremely easy to sail by yourself. When you tack your sloop, there's a lot of work involved, like with the sails coming across the deck and winches and turning. And when you tack a cat rigged boat with one sail, you just steer it through the wind. You're done. Also of note on a cat-rigged boat is how roomy the cabin is. This is a big win for them, and it's more than you think it is. Because the mast isn't in the middle, and this is what you would think of right away is, oh, I won't have a mast coming down the middle of my boat, but that really doesn't take up much space. But anyway, we've gotten rid of the mast. It's up at the front of the boat now, where there's no livable space anyway because the boat comes to a point. The other thing is, you don't need a bulkhead in the middle of your living space, and that's a bigger deal. If you have a mast coming down right, forward of the middle of the boat, you'll have a bulkhead right there to help support the stresses of the mast. Well, if you don't have the mast right there, you don't need a bulkhead, and therefore your living space isn't cut in half with a wall. Now, all that said, the cat rig sounds like a pretty good idea, but there are some downsides. Primarily, if you've ever sailed a Laser, you know its upwind performance is not that of a sloop. A cat rig will never touch a sloop for how high it can point. And this is why Nonsuch originally opted to go with a wishbone boom. It actually helps the upwind performance of the boat. It lets it point higher and makes it a faster boat on the upwind legs. So the biggest reason for a cat rig really is the simplicity of sailing it. It lends itself so well to short-handed sailing or single-handed sailing because there really isn't that much going on the deck as far as control lines and sheets and halyards. You just put up one sail, trim it, and you go sailing. It's quick and it's easy. Now, I guess one of the big questions is, what would you expect to pay for, let's say, a 40-year-old mid-30 footer in reasonably good shape? 40 years old, 35-ish feet. 20,000, 30,000 maybe. That does seem reasonable for a 40-year-old boat. Maybe even that's on the high side. But not if it's a Nonsuch. These things have such a following. They're so well made and so loved by so many people that a mid-30 footer that's 40 years old, $100,000. I'm not kidding. And that speaks volumes to really how well made they are and how many people really want one. So next time you see one of these odd looking ducks sailing by, give them a wave, respect, because now you know why their boat is so special. Little update for you guys on the Lady K front. We're now scheduled to launch in 1 week. We're going to have like masks and everything, and we're going to do it like the government guidelines here are pretty strict about stuff like that. So we're going to make sure we dot all our T's and cross all our I's. We've got some work to do in the next week, though. It's just getting warm enough outside that I can start doing glass work again. We had a little cold snap there with a lot of rain. So the steering on Lady K under the quadrant is doing something really funny, and I want to show you guys, so I want to get it on video. Basically, there's the quadrant in the bottom of the boat, and then there's basically a radiator hose, but bigger. It's a rubber tube, maybe 8 inches tall, and it goes from the bottom of the quadrant to the hull, and presumably there's a steering axle in there that attaches from the quadrant to the rudder blade. Well, when you turn the wheel and the quadrant turns, that rubber twists. Like the bottom is fastened to the hull, the top is fastened to the quadrant, and the rubber tube will twist the whole rubber. Picture a radiator hose holding it from both ends, twist it back and forth. Eventually, it's going to break in the middle, right? Well, this is what Lady K is doing right now, is it's twisting this rubber tube back and forth, and that rubber tube is double hose clamped. And if you know anything about ABYC code or about boats in general, something that is double hose clamped typically means it's keeping water out of the boat. So if there's water inside this tube, which the double hose clamps lead me to believe, and it is below the water line, why are we twisting it back and forth every time we move the wheel? It's making me really nervous because I don't know the answer. So this week I'm going to bring you guys with me and I'm going to film it, but I'm going to take the steering quadrant apart, which is a terrible idea because you got the cables and everything and the chain, and it's really hard to put back together properly. But I'm going to take it all apart and I'm going to figure out what's inside this rubber tube while the boat is still on the hard. And I need to understand how it all works, so I need to take it apart. And that's a big deal, understanding how your stuff works. So even if it is supposed to twist back and forth, which I don't think they would have designed it that way, but maybe I'm wrong. But even if it is supposed to twist back and forth, at least I took it apart. So now I know how it works. I know the internal workings of all that stuff that's going on under my quadrant, but above my rudder blade. And then if anything ever goes wrong, I know what's going on there. It's wonderful and gives me an opportunity to clean things and grease things and just make sure Lady K's steering system is in tip-top shape. So I will see you guys in a week. Next video is next Friday. Love you guys. Be safe.